Now, Dr. Major, the way we're going to set this up tonight is I'm going to give you an opportunity to introduce yourself, to say a few things about this topic. What are you thinking? What's in your mind? Share it with our audience, and then we'll get to a deeper conversation as we progress tonight. You want me to hold your mic too?
Yeah.
Are you bougie? I ain't holding your mic, doctor. I'm going to give you the mic. I'm going to release it to you with power and fervence.
Love it. And my phone rings. Good evening, everyone. Good evening, PYL and the Marathon branch. I wanted to congratulate the chairperson for inviting me and the leaders of the Marathon branch. It's my wife. She's just returning the call. All is well. And so I'm very pleased to be here, and those who are obviously my good friend and fellow panelists, Deputy Chair Robin Lyons, and of course Latrey Ramming, who's a bright young star, a rising star in this party and in this country, and all of the branch members who were responsible for being here. I want to start by saying I grew up just a stone's throw away from here in Marathon Estates. And in another life, I will come back as the Member of Parliament for Marathon. But Brother Major, you don't have to worry. You're safe. You're good with me. You carry a good name, so you got a fair chance. But I was, as you know, I was the Member of Parliament for Garden Hills in the last election and served as the Honourable Speaker of the House of Assembly. I have some prepared notes I wanted to get through, and I'm going to try to be as brief as possible because I know we want to get out of here and we want to get to some steps to the grill and get to some substantive issues. I think the topic is extremely apropos tonight because when we talk about restoring the dignity of of politics, that conjures up a lot of very interesting things in my mind. And I want to say, in terms of, as a thesis statement, I want to say this: restoring the dignity of politics requires an acute need for practical training in the principles of leadership development that will engender a mindset shift of those who we elect and those who elect them. That's a loaded statement. It's a loaded statement, and I'll try to explain a little bit about that throughout my presentation. I think we would agree that the country politics in general is in disarray. Things are not working as well as we would have liked, and the perception of politicians is certainly striking and causing us great concern. As young people, I have a question for you. Do you believe you are in the hearts and minds of politicians? Do you believe that they think seriously about young people? Just by your look, I can tell the answer is no. And I want to ask you this: would you answer yes if the PLP was in power? Silent. It's a good question, isn't it? I believe the answer probably would be somewhat the same in some respects. Now, I know this is a PLP event, but if you know me, I like to be a straight shooter. We have to decide that over the last 20 years, both parties have been responsible for leading this nation. And we have to acknowledge that there are things that we could improve upon. That's not giving into the fight. I believe that's the beginning of a winning formula for our party in the next election. We have to decide that we will never compromise our core values of the PLP. And you know what they are. They're written, and the last time I read them, I first saw them, they were published in 1953 in the Tribune, and it talked about how the PLP ought to conduct themselves in governance. I think you ought to read it, it'll be very interesting. And we must also establish a vision that we are all willing to die by. So we are in disarray. There's slackness and a disconnect in our people at many levels. This sense of dignity, I believe, is related to the lack of relationship and responsibility of politicians to these four sectors. One, the press. Two, the young people. Three, fellow politicians. And four, of course, the general public. Let's talk about the press just for a moment. The present disagreement that you see today between the Honorable Speaker that exists and the press is, I find, very instructive. 2 days ago, I got 4 phone calls from journalists wanting some red meat. And the red meat essentially was, what do you have to say about what happened in the House of Assembly? And my answer to them, I'm sure probably disappointed them, but at the end of the day, I told them, in essence, it is easy to sit where I sit today from my perch and criticize another sitting member who've made a judicial decision, whether it's right, wrong, or indifferent. And if I were in that position, would I have made the same decision? I trust not. But obviously, because he is there, he was faced with a different scenario. And so I was careful in my capacity as a private citizen not to criticize his decision, although one could argue that in some respects it was over the top in some respects. And we could criticize it, but for me in my position to add more fuel to that, it would be easy for me to just, from where I sit, criticize a former speaker. And I've sat in that chair and have also made some mistakes. Secondly, I want to mention the Parliament. How the Parliament is conducted today, I believe, is deeply tribal, unprincipled in many respects, and uninspiring to our young people. In many respects, it's mediocre and unproductive. From the bills to the process to the procedures, there's a lot that needs to be answered and needs to be addressed among our people today. We are spiraling out of control day by day, but yet the politicians of the day and the system of the day have not recognized the need to change it. And that's as much as it is my fault as it is the present politicians. The procedures of Parliament doesn't serve the interests of the public today because much of what takes place is a disconnect with the public. So people see politicians as confused and cynical. So when Madam Chair talks about how all of a sudden people feeling a sense that she is doing it for public, for private and personal and political gain, that's a part of the cynicism that's emerged within the public because she's being labeled as a politician. And so automatically people start to wonder, what's your motive? You see, that came from a place. That just didn't come overnight. That came from people being beat down and being disappointed, being lied to, being rejected, being used for years, and no accountability, nothing done about it. And so Peter is no better than Paul in many persons' respects. So how do we restore the dignity of our politics? We recognize that we have some serious problems. One is, we don't need any more politicians in leadership. We need leadership in our politicians. And so it makes me question the motives of the politician today. Why? I told a friend of mine just the other day, there was a time when I was considering politics and during the campaign, and I remember making the distinct decision at the time that I wouldn't go into the cabinet because my salary will not be able to, I would not be able to live on the salary of a cabinet minister because it would be far lower than I make in private practice. I figure that's straight up, that's legitimate, it's the truth. But one of the things I've learned about being in politics is some persons go in cabinet to make more money than private practice. It's the truth. And it's real talk. So it starts with, we reproduce after our own kind. If our citizens are corrupted, if our citizens are not inspired, if our citizens are educated all the same place, we are exposed to the same things. We reproduce after our own kind. So for that mindset shift to take place, we need training, we need deliberate training so that, and the right information so that we understand where this concept of the politician, the crooked politician, the lying politician, the cheating politician, where did that emanate from? And I would surmise that one of the first things we did is from 67 when we took over the reins of this country as a PLP and the majority rule. From that point on to now, what we have done is we have just supplanted the colonizers and essentially become them ourselves. So we have moved the country forward in many respects, but in a lot of respects, in a lot of areas, we have dumbed down the system and did the same thing that our colonizers did to us. We are doing to our people. And so people are cynical, people are distrusting. We have to regain the trust of the electorate. And we can do it. Politics is still a noble profession, if you were to call it that. It is still noble. It started out being noble from the Greeks and from the Aristotle days. But something happened over a period of time from a gentleman by the name of Niccolo Machiavelli. And if any of you all read the book, The 48 Laws of Power, you would see some of the notions of where that idea of leadership comes from in the boardroom, of how to manipulate people, lie to people. Instead of the golden rule, you have those with the goal makes all the rules, as opposed to do unto others as you help them do unto you. If y'all came for real talk, we could talk it. So this is what has happened to politics, and the typical politician today have gravitated to that because they became selfish, they became greedy, and they saw this as an opportunity to get more for me. And so they have taken over the mindset, and the mindset has permeated through various levels of the parties, the governance, and from the top to the bottom. We carry this mindset of do what you gotta do to get over just to be re-elected in 5 years. So as I close, this word dignity that is used so aptly in our topic today, it speaks to honor. They call us honorable, don't they? It speaks to nobility, sacrifice, love, mercy. The Bible tells us to act justly and love mercy and walk humbly before your God. That's what you would expect the politician today to do. But are they? Don't mind if they say that they're Christian, because we all say that we're Christian when we're good and ready and we have a microphone in our hands. But look at the substance of who we are and how we operate. In fact, Adolf Hitler gave a speech, and if you read a sample of that speech, you will see he's speaking to Christians, acting like a Christian. But you know how the story ends with him. So there are indignities of politics that's caused a slave mentality in our own leaders. So our leadership of our countries have taken on the same slave mentality because we're just trying to get what we can get. And that's why the Bible says, woe to those when the slave becomes king. Because the slave, not because he's a slave, it's his mindset. It's how he thinks about himself. So if he doesn't love himself, how can he love you? But there's hope. There is hope. There's hope among us because we have the blueprint. And the blueprint is in our party's constitution, it's in our party's bylaws, it is our party's core value. We need to re-emerge, reconnect, revisit, and re-promote what is meant to us and be serious of the principles of leadership. People are sick and tired of just going yo-yo, tit for tat, money for fat. They're sick of it. I saw it on the campaign, I saw it in the House, I saw it among us, I see it today, and I saw it yesterday. We will continue to spiral out of control unless we decide The onus is on us, this first major party of our great country, who have produced people like Celinda Pindlin, who I've had the opportunity to meet and inspire me, and produce people like even Sir Cecil Wallace Whitfield, who was a part of his cabinet, and people like Hubert Ingram, who was chairman of the party. This party produced people like that. I am a proud PLP, and if we're going to maintain our pride, we have to step up. I'm going to close now so that you can hear someone a little bit more exciting, a young person. And so thank you very much for your attention. Good night.
Please give Dr. Major a hand. I had a question for Dr. Major, and it was, what does dignity in politics mean to you? But you answered that in your presentation. And so, Doc, can you take a seat for me? I'm going to call you back.
I would just like to add that I think the Free National Movement was a bit uncanny in their public relations and crafting the message that the PLP was corrupt. And they used social media to their advantage, and it painted this idea in people's mind. And I think that's a narrative that they have been doing for years upon years. And I think the Progressive Liberal Party as a government didn't pay attention to the noise in the market. I think our leaders somehow became disconnected from the rank and file on the floor, and so they missed the mark, they missed the boat as to recognize that they were being exposed. So I think the emperor was naked and they didn't know, and didn't. So I think all of that was a part of it. If a narrative is crafted and it catches on and there's a perception, then it takes off. And when that took off and things started to happen and we didn't address certain things head on, in your face, people saw accountability and transparency as being cynical towards it, and then they took the jest by how they depict you through social media. I think at the end of the day, it becomes, we have to be very focused on our communication, and the best strategy, in my view, towards mitigating the damage of social media is getting into the heads and the understanding and using the technology of young people. Use the young people because they're the ones who have mastered it. They're the ones who have discovered all of these wonderful innovations like Facebook and Amazon and the others. And so I think we need the young people to be able to master that. So we have to indoctrinate them into the ideas and the ideals of progressive liberal partyism. And then from that standpoint, we'll have to balance it as we go.
Thank you. And so the same question for you, Latrice.
When I think it was Barry, Vice Chair Barry, mentioned about politics and what it means to him, to answer your question, Madam Chair, the dignity of politics, I believe politics was dignified in the era of majority rule. That's my personal view, because it is the historical information that I experienced, read about, was a part of, and an understanding of what him and his groupings did for the aspirations of a people in taking them out of, to some degree, mental and physical bondage. I think that's when politics initially became dignified, because it was an understanding of what statesmanship was all about. And I saw that, and I believe that was practiced then. And somewhere along the way, we have lost that. It has been dumbed down, and Latrice is absolutely correct. I believe the present government does not understand sufficiently their role and responsibility from morphing from the politician to governance. And that's very distinguishable. So the politician serves and they campaign, but after election is over, we must come together as a country and be the prime minister and the minister for all. And I have seen campaign after campaign from day one to the I think that's a great question, and certainly data and studies will need to dig a little bit deeper into that. But from my vantage point, I would say that a lot in the last election, I have credible evidence that persons were paid to stay home. And so what has happened in our election is it has been corrupted.
Yes.
Truly corrupted. And I am not saying this to point a finger. I am saying the process has been corrupted. And one of the things that the Progressive Liberal Party ought to do is legislate campaign finance reform in the first order at the first opportunity. And here's why that's important. Our base still remains to be the middle class, or what I would call the poor. And I say that with pride. I say that with pride because at the very essence of who we are, 80% of the Bahamian workers and electorate are people who are a part in many respects of the working poor, not just people who do not have a job, but those who have a job that's struggling. That's where all of us came from. We came out of the belly of the working poor. We were proud of it, but that's who we are. And it is critical that as a party and as our leaders, we need to focus on the love and the respect and the legislation of uplifting the poor. If we stay connected to that grouping, if we keep our eyes like flint on the people who are least fortunate, the middle class, if all of our legislation and our governance is focused on uplifting them, when we were elected in 2012 and we saw the cadre of men and women who stood together, and we got on the stage and we looked at each other, some of us vowed that it's no way we ought not be in power for 15 years.
Yes.
Easy. We had the intelligence, we had the character, we had the leadership.
Yes.
But we lost that fire in the
people.
belly for the poor.
Yeah, you disappoint your people.
And that still remains. And what drives me to believe that this is bullseye is because the message of the Bible through the kingdom of God is for the poor.
Yes.
The kingdom message from the greatest leader and politician that ever lived was Jesus Christ. And his message was to the poor. Our message needs to be to the poor.
Yes.
Thank you. Go home. I want to ask you first straight. This is the last question. Well, maybe I should start off with you, Dr. Major. The final question that I have for you is, if there was one thing that you could say to a young person desiring to enter political public life, what would that be?
I would say to the young person, the decision to go into politics and public life is a very, very serious undertaking. And the first question I would ask the individual is, have they asked themselves 5 questions? Who am I? Where am I going? What am I here to do? So that each of those questions introspectively cause the person to self-discover and understand that it clears the cobwebs as to what is the real purpose for getting into public life. Is it to serve sacrificially? Is it to make more money? Is it because that's what people do when they have nothing else to do? Is it because you're a professional and someone tell you could speak well? This is the time for principle over politics. This is the time for character over charisma. This is the time for young people to be prepared financially, emotionally, spiritually. They have to get connected. They have to understand the party, understand the history of our country, have a natural national love for country. It's a number of questions I would ask the young person, but they have to get prepared. the only way that can happen is asking yourself the tough question, who are you and what you're hoping to achieve?
Thank you. Thank you so much. And my final question for you, Latre, because you and Dr. Major are coming from different perspectives. He's been in the game, and I think it is your intention to move